It is virtually inevitable. It is a developmental phase that's going to take place. Now, folks, I really feel that I need to deal with this subject rather straightforwardly because so few people will do it within the Christian community. It is an untouchable topic, and we've been afraid to discuss it, but we must because the kids are at stake. And let's talk about it. Now, let me discuss it, first of all, from a medical, psychological point of view, and then let's look at it very quickly from the moral aspect. First of all, research on this subject is clear, just almost no controversy, and that's unusual in any scientific field, that masturbation is harmful in only 3 circumstances that I know of. Only 3 times that I know of that it's harmful. First, when it is associated with unrelenting and incalculable guilt. That kind of guilt will eat you alive no matter what the subject matter. And folks, this is why I bring it up to you here today, because it's my experience that children within the evangelical community especially suffer unimaginable guilt over their absolute inability to control this urge. And I use those words advisedly. For many boys, it is absolutely uncontrollable. And here's the process that takes place, and I've seen this too many times, and I feel it very deeply, and I know it's dangerous to bring up a controversial subject like this and all of that, but I feel an obligation to do so. The process is that a boy who loves God, and a girl too, this is not exclusively a masculine thing, will go before the Lord and say, Lord, I've done this horrible thing. Please forgive me. It's awful. I'm a wretched sinner. Please make me clean again. And there is that oneness and that closeness that comes when God and man are united in that beautiful moment. And he says, I will never do that again, Lord. And he's never been more determined. And then a week goes by, and 2 weeks go by, and 3 weeks go by, and 4, and now he's into the 2nd month perhaps, who knows how long, maybe 2 days go by. But sooner or later, you see, the hormonal pressure gets greater, it builds. That's another difference between males and females. In males, there's an accumulating hormonal pressure over time. And the pressure gets greater, and the mechanism that God designed becomes all-encompassing, so that it fills his world, and he dreams about it by night, and he thinks about it by day. And just being in the company of a girl, it does not even have to be an attractive girl, sets off the mechanism. And folks, sooner or later, it happens again. See? 2 or 3 minutes in a moment of weakness, it's just too available, and it happens again. And then, folks, what do you say to God when you've just broken your 300th promise to him? What do you say when you go back before him? Guilt enormous, eternal damnation hanging over you. This is an incredible pain that kids go through. And I've seen them suffer with it. And why I tell you about it is I've seen us lose them to God in the church because that pain is so great, they got to do something to get away from it. And frequently they will convince themselves of atheism or who knows what just to escape that pain. Had a chaplain of a large Christian college who told me on the basis of his counseling, which he does all day long, that it is his belief that most of the spiritual despair that occurs among the men of his campus result from their inability to gain victory over this habit. It is all encompassing. So first, has to do with guilt. Secondly, it is harmful when it occurs in a group. And the reason I think it's harmful when it occurs in a group is because sexual energy in early adolescence is not very well fixed. Freud called it a homosexual phase. I don't believe that. But there is a time when the object of sexual interest is not well fixed on the opposite sex. And I'm convinced that some homosexuality, I can't prove this, this is my belief, hypothesis. Some homosexuality begins by perhaps roommates or at campmates or something of that nature catching each other, masturbating during that time, and making a group thing out of it. And then it's not very difficult to rechannel sexual energy. See, this is why homosexuality spreads. This is why it's not a constant from society to society. It varies. There are some societies where it's much greater. And one of the reasons is that there's a time in a boy's life when he can be turned in that regard. And so I see that as harmful. Thirdly, the third time that I think it's harmful is when it continues into marriage, and instead of being an adolescent experience, it becomes a substitute for what God intended between a husband and a wife. And folks, that is very, very common. The incidence of masturbation representing a substitute for sex in marriage is estimated to be as high as 30%. And I think that, again, that's very harmful, because this is what the Bible talks about not defrauding one another. See, we have an obligation to meet each other's needs. And when a person has reverted to an adolescent avenue, then the other person's needs are not being met. And that's the third occasion where it's thought to be harmful. You know, something's very interesting to me at this moment. I got to tell you something. I'm thinking it, you might as well know what I'm thinking. I watch a crowd very carefully. I really do. I see everything that goes on in a crowd this size. You may not believe it, but I do. And there are two things that I pay attention to in a crowd. There are two bits of information that I get from you that let me know whether you're with me or not, or whether you're bored with what I'm doing. Because if you're bored, then I might as well be doing something else. The first is yawns. I see every yawn that goes on. And a yawn is an abomination to a speaker. You cannot yawn and listen to me at the same time. It's impossible. And I hate yawns, and I want to tell you, there were 4 of you that yawned this morning, and I have all 4 of your names. If I see 3 yawns in a row, I'll stop and we'll do something else. Well, the second bit of information that I pay attention to is surface noise. When you are very interested, let's put it the other way, when you're not interested in what I'm saying, you don't get up and walk out, most of you, but you shuffle and you move and you cough and you whisper, and it comes through to me as a high level of racket. But when you're very interested, it gets very quiet. And when I was talking about that last subject, I could hear you breathing on the back row. Want to know why? You know why you got so quiet? Because this is where we live. We are sexual creatures. That's not our design. That's God's design. He made us that way. And it's a subject of intense interest. And the moment it comes up, a hush falls on a crowd. Now, folks, if it is that important to us, it is much more important to our immature adolescents. And we must have the courage to deal with it. I just caught a man yawning. And he nearly choked when I saw him. Folks, I want to share something with you. I get a lot of mail. I get mail on this subject. The real reason I raise that topic with you is because I'm not just talking about kids, I'm talking about us too. And there is a great deal of guilt associated with this act even yet. This is a letter that came from a woman. I don't want to take the time to read that. Let me read you another one. I got another one here that illustrates it even better. She said, "Dear Dr. Dobson, I am writing this letter in the hopes that you will help me. If we were face to face, I would never tell you what I need to get out of my system. I'm not going to read you the whole letter, and it's very personal." She said, "Just help me, please. Notice the pain and the guilt and the intensity of this issue. This problem, and she's talking about the same thing, has caused me torment and heartache for the past 25 years. I've begged God, and now I'm begging you, please help me. Let me go to the end of the letter. She says, I am tormented, and my family is starting to suffer more and more for it. I am very ashamed of my great weakness. And as I said, if we were face to face, I would not be able to tell you the things that I did, but I'm desperate for help. And I'm very weak. Notice the reference to inferiority here. It is usually associated with that. I am a rotten person. I am very weak, and I'm tired of fighting and losing. I thought that getting married would help, but it didn't. You see, I'm a very low-down person. But I want to be up, I mean respectable, just to respect myself. I can't pay you. But if you would just take some time to try to give me some words of help in some way. Not even my religion has been able to help. I believe God can, I know that, but he hasn't yet, and maybe he will through you. Please, Dr. Dobson, write back to me, please, and tell me something. Yours truly, P.S. You are my last hope. Anything that matters that much to us, we ought to have the courage to talk about. Now, folks, let's talk about what you tell your kids and the moral implications of this situation. And that is the much harder aspect of the question. Let me first tell you what not to say. That's a whole lot easier. This, folks, is what you should not say to your pre-adolescent about masturbation. Are you ready? I found this in a book published about in 1943, and it was my wife's book, and it was called How Christian Girls Grow Up. And this is the way the author dealt with the issue of masturbation. This is the traditional message to kids on that subject. Doctors tell, brace yourself now, doctors tell us that 95% of the boys practice at one time or another self-abuse, as she called it. And more than 65% of the girls engage in this habit. Many of you have been caught in its meshes and you want to be free. Now notice what she just drops in here. Ding. Whether or not the habit will cause you to go insane or is wrong is not the deciding factor in self-abuse. Folks, if that were true, there'd be a lot more crazy people walking around. Second thought, maybe that's what's wrong with us. Now listen to this now. She just said you're going to go crazy. This habit drains from your body vital fluids which nature demands to build a graceful and healthy body. And when you practice it, you are threatening your future. All right, it's going to cause you to go crazy, and you're going to die, too. You are also I don't know what's left after that, but you are also wrecking your sex nature so that sooner or later you will fail in giving the boy you marry the satisfaction his nature will demand, because before marriage you expended your vital reservoir of sex energy while young in a habit that should never be in a girl's life. Now her advice, when you feel that urge coming on you, get up immediately and do something different from what you're doing at the time. All right, that's pretty good advice. Throw your mind out of the sex gear and onto something which will demand your attention. If alone, get with someone else immediately. That could be risky, too. And do not give passion time to mature upon you. And her final comment, possibly, she just throws this in a little afterthought, possibly you better change your eating habits and do less with hot peppers, condiments, and the like. That's not what to say to your kids. What do you say to them? Folks, I honestly don't know. And I used to deal with this subject and come to this point and say, in effect, I really don't think that it's right for me to tell you what I think because I don't know what God thinks. It is very dangerous to put words in the mouth of the Lord. And on the moral issues of this, the Bible is just about silent. There are obviously many places in the Bible where it talks about lusting. He that looketh on the body of a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her in his heart already. That relates, perhaps. We'll have to define what Jesus meant by lust. But there is no direct reference to it in the Bible. And so we have to be cautious in saying this is right or this is wrong. And I say again before the Lord right now, the last thing on earth that I want is to someday stand before God and be accused of misleading his people all over this country. Lord, I pray that that will not happen. And I still don't know the answer. All I can tell you is what I think. And I throw it out with great cautiousness because I don't feel I have a right to withhold that from you. You take it or leave it. Please do not go out of here and say, I said what God said, and that I'm speaking for God because I don't know. I can only tell you the conclusion that I have drawn. I see masturbation as an adolescent experience that is almost inevitable, and I don't believe that a loving God would put a raging fire in an immature kid and then damn him for doing what he can't help doing. That doesn't make sense to me. That does not represent sexual looseness or revisionism of the Scripture. Premarital sex is damned, and it should be. And the adultery and infidelity and all the rest of it, I believe it just straight as an arrow, but I just don't believe this developmental phase is condemned, and if it were, it would have been directly addressed. And what I attend, that's just my view. There's another way of looking at it. All I can tell you is the conclusion I've drawn. And my view on it is based on what my dad said to me when I was 11 years old. Because we were riding in the car. We had about 4 or 5 hours there of time to talk without interference. And the whole idea for this Preparing for Adolescence series, as nearly everything that I believe, came from him or from my mother. And he said a lot of things to me that night that I'll never forget. But one of the things that he said was, Jim, on the issue of masturbation, and he hit it head on, he said, I'm going to tell you something that I really can't tell you is right or not. I can only tell you the best conclusion I've been able to draw. And he was as straight as an arrow. I never saw him compromise one time in my life. He said when I was a boy, I went through agony over this issue. I could never enjoy my relationship with God. And he said it was all-encompassing. But he said, since I've become a man, I've prayed about it, and I've thought about it, and I've read the Bible, and I've talked to people that I believe in. And he said, what I'm going to tell you may not be right, but he said, I have drawn the conclusion that if it happens to you, I really wouldn't worry very much about it, because I don't think it has much to do with your relationship with God. And he lifted that off me. And in the adolescent years when my friends and my relatives and people that I knew were going through that agony, and some of them left the church and never came back at that time, I didn't struggle with that. And I will say that to my son Ryan. There are differences of opinion. And the last thing I want to do is to invite you here and then beat your theology down. I don't mean that. But I just feel that whatever you believe about it, if you disagree with me, you have an obligation to get your own message to your kids. That's what I'm saying. You see, don't allow them to go into those years without some message. And especially if you've told your kids, as I have, that there is a life after death, and that there is an accountability, and that someday our lives will be laid bare before God, and there is eternal punishment and eternal reward. I believe all that, and I've given that to my children. If you have too, then you really have a responsibility to help them deal with the guilt associated with this, because either way they're going to do it.
Thank you for joining us for this Focus on the Family classic presentation of How to Prepare for Adolescence, featuring psychologist and author Dr. James Dobson. If you'd like to know more about Dr. Dobson's views, we invite you to write for a free copy of this best-selling book, Preparing for Adolescence. It's helped hundreds of thousands of parents prepare their young children for the difficult teenage years. He gives you advice on that special conversation about sexuality, on helping your child feel better about himself, and other issues of concern to parents. Preparing for Adolescence is a practical how-to book on surviving the teenage years. We'd like to send you a copy free of charge. Send your request to Focus on the Family, Box 30, Arcadia, California, 91006. Ask for your copy of Preparing for Adolescence. Again, that address is Focus on the Family, Box 30, Arcadia, California, 91006. I'm Gary Bender. Thank you for joining us for this Focus on the Family classic presentation.
Your kids need to know, folks, that they're going to grow up, because they don't know that. Your late maturing kids need to know. So tell them before adolescence that there is a little gland in the center of the head about the size of the end of your finger called a pituitary. And if we could look at your pituitary, there'd be a little calendar in it. Doesn't look like a calendar, it looks like chemicals, but locked in those chemicals is a plan for your body. We don't know what it says, but it is designed by God, and you will grow up. We all grow up. If you don't believe it, look at all the adults around you. You see any of them that look like little kids? None of them look like little kids. Your dad, he has that deep bass voice. You think he always had that? You think when he was in the crib, he said, goo, goo?